Hello neighbors, it's Brad here at eTrailer, and today we're taking a look at installing the Roadmaster base plate for flat towing on a 2018 Mini Cooper. Now there's normally 5 main components that are required for flat towing your vehicle, and we'll start on the vehicle side. The first one's going to be the base plate, and that's going to be the attachment point to the solid portion of the frame or bumper beam of the vehicle, and that's where you have your removable arms here that attach to your tow bar. So that's going to be our second component, the tow bar, which is going to be the connection point between the base plate of the vehicle and the hitch on the RV. Now going along with that, our base plate does have these loops here for our safety chains. Our safety chains are going to be that third component there, and that, in case of an accidental disconnect, is rare obviously, but this is going to make sure that it stays attached to the RV. Now another thing that we have is our diode wiring, and that's mounted up here, and that's going to send our light signals from the RV to the towed vehicle, so when you're using your running lights, brake lights, or turn signals, the people behind you can know what's going on, and that's going to keep you safe and legal. Now there is one other component that we don't actually have on our Mini Cooper today, and that's a supplemental braking system. And this car falls under a weight category that's low enough to where you don't actually have to have one legally. Now it is a nice way to make sure that your vehicle slows and stops as you do that with the RV, and normally you'll have a breakaway switch, and that way in case of all of your components failing and it's separating from the RV, that cable will pull and it's going to put the brakes on the vehicle, bringing it to a stop. But again, since we are under that weight capacity, we don't have that here, and that's going to be up to you and your state's legalities. Now this is what your base plate is going to look like when you are ready to flat tow your vehicle, and you can see the removable arms here when attached. Put this out in a nice position, easy to hook up. You also have your safety chain loops that protrude just far enough to where you can hook up without having to worry about your fascia getting hit, but also it's pretty subtle overall even when you are unhooked. It's really nice too. There's also a mounting bracket for your diode wiring that keeps it nice and tucked center in the grill portion here. So overall, pretty easy installation without a ton of cutting. Now when you're done flat towing your vehicle and you're ready to unhook, it's pretty easy here. We'll just get our hooks out of our safety chain loops, unhook our tow bar here, and our diode wiring. And then if you're going to hit the road and you want your car to have that little bit more OEM look and you're not towing it, pretty easy to just twist and remove these arms by the pull of a pin. So that way you get a nice clean look, as it utilizes the factory air vents here, so they're really no chopping up necessary. It's really nice that it fits right in there and everything looks really good when you're not hooked up. But even still, it has a clean look overall, and it's a pretty easy installation. So there's no real major cutting that you have to do. A little bit of trimming for your plug. You're gonna have to drill a hole for a mounting bracket here, but it's a really complete kit and it can be done fairly easily. Now you do have to take the front fascia off, but I'm gonna show you how to do that during the installation portion. And whenever you're done and ready to go and ready to hook up, again, these are gonna be super easy to just slide in here. And those are going to snap into place, and that nice little snap of that ring means that it's locked in and you're ready to go. So all you have to do to get towing is hook up the rest of your components and hit the road. Now taking off the fascia of your vehicle does seem sometimes daunting, but also during your flat tow installation, to get all your components set up, it makes it easier to run all those components while the fascia is off. So once you do your base plate, you can leave this fascia off until you get everything in place, and then it'll go together nice and clean. So speaking of the installation, let's go to the bay and take a look at how that's done. Now our installation is going to require the front fascia coming off, and that way we can get our base plate bolted up. But in order to start that process, we need to get the fascia off, and we're going to start here. We have 3 Torx bits, and these are going to be T30s, so we're going to go ahead and get these 3 off. Now there's going to be quite a bit of hardware that's coming off for the installation, and for the reinstallation of the fascia, I highly suggest having a nice organized spot to keep all your hardware. It'll just make it a little bit easier for you later on. Now we're going to go to each wheel well, and we're going to find an 8mm screw. So just kind of right behind this reflector where our wheel well liner and our front fascia meet, you're going to find that 8mm. So go ahead and get that removed. Now if this spot is pretty tight to get to with tools, if you can't get a ratchet in there, if you need to, you can always turn the wheel in, and that's going to give you a lot more access to be able to get a straight shot with a drill or an impact or something along those lines. So now that we have this one removed, we'll go ahead and hop over to the other side and get that one taken off as well. So now we need to go underneath our front fascia, and we're going to see where the fascia actually attaches to this underbody panel. And it's just going to be a series of 8mm screws. So we have 3 on each side, and then there's 1 in the middle, and then 3 on the other side. So we'll go ahead and get those all removed. Next, we need to gain access to a Torx bit that's attaching the fascia to the frame of the vehicle, and that's going to involve pulling off this fender liner here. Now, there's going to be a series of clips, and I think the best way to do this is kind of put your fingers behind here. You should be able to get these clips to kind of pop out pretty easy, and that's just going to give us a little bit more room, because where it attaches here, they're a little bit tricky. So I'll show you how to get those separated. Because they're kind of locked into this bottom portion, there's a tab that's locked in. We need to kind of pry up on the bottom. So I had luck using a pick to kind of just get that bottom part popped through that plastic. So just take your time there. I'll get mine popped off, and then I'll show you kind of the technique and what it looks like. So I just have a small pick. If you have a small flathead, that'll probably work too. But we're really just trying to lift up on that bottom portion and pull out in the process here, and that should get it to separate pretty easily. And then the other one's going to be identical. You can kind of come from the backside if you need to, but again, just try to pry on that a little bit, and you can see this is the locking tab, so we're just trying to push this up to get over that plastic edge. So once you get that popped out, you're going to want to separate this wiring here that goes on that side marker light. So just push in on the tab, and sometimes they can be tricky, and you can push in, and that can loosen up some of that buildup that happens on those plugs. And then we could get this to separate. There we go. And then I'm just going to peel this back a little bit. There's going to be 4 more clips, so just kind of be gentle here. You don't want to crease this plastic because that can leave a permanent line here. The main thing is we're trying to gain access to our T30 Torx bit here. And something else I'm going to do is put some painter's tape along this edge. You don't want this rubbing against the fascia when pulling it off or when putting it back on. So a little bit of painter's tape on both edges is just going to prevent any scratching on that clear coat. And then we'll just repeat this same process on the other side. Now you might want to grab an extra set of hands as you pull your fascia off. That way you don't drop it. They can be a little bit cumbersome. And this should come off pretty easy, but we do have fog lamps on here. So chances are we are going to have some electrical connections. So you don't want to pull it out too far. Pull it out, figure out where the wiring is, separate that, and then make sure you have a nice place to put your fascia. So we'll go ahead, we'll get this kind of pulled back here. Just kind of working your way from the outside towards the middle. Seems to be the best way to do that. Now while pulling our fascia back, I noticed that our wires are already pretty tight here for our fog lamps, and it looks like there's going to be 3 plugs on each side. So we'll go ahead and get these separated. So little push tabs for that one. This one should also be somewhat similar. There should be a little clip somewhere. Now with my hand out of the way, you can see the 3 plugs that went into the fog lamp. So this one you're just going to pinch on the side and pull down. This one you have a clip up top. And then this one, you also have a clip right here. So just make sure that you're taking your time with these. You don't want to damage the wire. So we'll get those separated on the other side, and then we should be good on our fascia. On our passenger side, we have our washer fluid bottle, and we're going to need to gain access to some hardware down here. So we need to get this not completely removed, but at least pulled aside, and that way it's going to be out of the way for us. So I have a zip tie ready to just kind of attach this up. But to get it removed, you have your filler neck bottle. You're going to lift up and out, and there's going to be this clip that just slides in there. So just kind of be gentle. You can see kind of the angle that you're working with, but that should pop out. And then we have 2 T30s that are, you can see the studs poking out through here. So we'll go ahead and get these removed. So now I'm going to kind of tilt this back, and it does sit in some plastic on the bottom there. So you might need to kind of work this a little bit around to get it loose. But I'm going to kind of just wiggle this, and you can almost feel the plastic. They're almost like oval shapes on the bottom. I'm going to try to get these lifted out. And it's kind of tight here just because of the bracket of where that hardware was. So if you can kind of move it around from there, that's kind of what you're looking for. And I'm going to just kind of get this set aside just enough really so we can gain access here. Now I'm just going to run my zip tie through right here and then just attach it. And this is going to just support it and make sure that it doesn't put stress on any of these wires. And you're going to see it is attached down here, so just don't pull too hard. But this should be enough space for us. With that out of the way, we can gain access to our T25 Torx bit here. And this is holding our vent tube in place. We have one on each side, so we're going to need to remove both of them. And they're not going to be going back on after we install the base plate. So you can set those aside if you want to later put them on your vehicle, if you return it back to stock. But for now, we're going to just remove ours, and we will not need it. Now, there are some plastic clips back here, too, that you can see are kind of attaching it in. Almost looks like a rivet, so we may need to separate those, but we'll get this removed. Now before we pull our vent tubes out, we need to go in the inside fender liner, and you're going to see there's going to be two plastic push pins that are attaching it here in the fender liner. So we'll go ahead and get these lifted out. And if this trim panel tool does a really good job of getting these, but if you don't have one, you can pick one up here at eTrailer, or you can use a flathead screwdriver. So that head pops out, and we should be able to get this whole thing out. It's kind of fighting me a little bit, but there we go. And then there's one up top here as well. So with those plastic push pins taken out and our T25 removed, this just simply comes out like this. And we're going to repeat on the driver's side, but the driver's side is going to have an ambient air temperature sensor. So I'll show you how to get that removed. And that sensor is just going to live right here, right behind this cross member. So we'll be relocating this later. So just push on that tab up top, and we'll get this separated here. And then we can get our vent tube taken out. So we're going to go ahead and get this sensor pulled out, and it just simply pops out like that. I'm going to plug it back in. That way we have it all attached and we don't lose track of this. But now we can get our vent tubes just set aside, as we're not going to reinstall them. We're going to be relocating this in a later step, so not to worry, you'll still maintain the use of your ambient air temperature sensor. So now we're going to go to each side, and you're going to find two 18mm bolts. So we're going to go ahead and get those removed on both sides of the vehicle. Maybe a little tight here, but let me get these moving here. And with these out, we'll go ahead and repeat on the other side. So now you want to grab your driver's side specific bracket, and you can see this is different than the other one in the kit, so just make sure that you are choosing the right one here, and you'll know pretty quick because this will line up pretty easily. So in order to get this in place, we're going to grab these long bolts, and I have a split washer here, and this is going to feed through, and then we're going to be putting a small pipe spacer on here when we get this in place. But something else we're going to want to do is put a little bit of red Loctite here, just kind of make sure that over time these are going to stay in place. So make sure you do this to both bolts. And the way that this feeds in, it's kind of just slides up through here. And then we'll see this aligns pretty easily. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to at least get my bottom one started. So run that bolt through. And then I'm going to just kind of pass that in. I'll go ahead and grab my other one here. Get these tightened down. We're going to come back and torque them later with the torque wrench. So main thing is we're just going to try to get this nice and snug. That way we know that it's aligned properly. And these are just feeding into those holes that we just took the hardware out of. So I'm going to get these tightened down. We're going to try to get this to where these holes are level as possible. So that's kind of what we're looking for as we tighten this down. So now I've gone ahead and just kind of snugged it down. It's not super tight. I still have a little bit of wiggle room, which is fine, but I'm looking to make sure that this is nice and vertical. That way it's aligned when we get the base plate put on. So we'll go ahead and repeat the same step using the passenger specific brace, but you're still going to use the same hardware. So go ahead and get that in place. We're going to need to trim this air deflector here. Now be careful, obviously your intercooler's here, and we're looking to create a little bit of space for our crossbar to go over here, or our main receiver brace. So I've just taped this out to give you a visual reference of where we're going to be cutting. It's also nice, it's going to keep your lines nice and clean as long as you follow that tape. Now as far as cutting it, you can use a pair of snips pretty easily on here. I'm going to be using a Dremel just because it's fairly easy to do, so whatever method works best for you, go right ahead. So I'm going to go back and just kind of clean up some of my lines here, but then we'll just repeat the same process on the other side. So now you're going to want to grab your receiver base of your base plate, and this is going to slide in between the two mounting points that we just created. Now I'm going to go ahead and put my hardware in place, and this is just going to kind of keep this and holding up. We're going to be doing some adjusting, so main thing is we want to just make sure that this is holding up. That way we can adjust it later. And what we're going to do is we're going to put our bolts through and then finish it up with a lock washer and then our nut. So we'll have two on each side, so we'll go ahead and get those hand tightened on. And I'll be coming back later with some thread lock. Sometimes if you put it on prematurely, it can kind of fight you when you go to tighten it down. So for now, we're just going to thread this in. Now, another reason I haven't put the thread lock on is as I'm threading these on our driver's side, you can see there's quite a bit of gap, so I'm not really able to get my split washer on. So what I'm going to do is tighten these down to kind of cinch this together, and then I can get my split washer put on bottom, and then I can unloosen the top and get that split washer put on top. So I'm going to go ahead with a 3/4 inch wrench and socket and just kind of get this snug down. So now I have some more threads to work with. I can go ahead and get that nut put back on. And now I can go back to my top one and get that split washer on as well. So we have this bolted in, but obviously you can see it's got some movement, and that's totally fine, but we need to make sure that this is nice and square so everything's facing actually parallel with the ground. We don't want it crooked. And the best way to do this is right under here, you can see the metal portion of our bumper support. We want to measure from there to the top of our receiver brace, and we want to be able to have about 4 1/8 of an inch. So we're looking pretty good as long as I pull up here. So we're going to want to make sure to tighten in a certain sequence, and we're also going to torque these down. We're going to start by doing the rear ones first, and then also we'll move our way here. So just do the rear ones on both sides first and then move your way up. And again, just double checking your measurements as you tighten this down. I'm also going to go ahead and put thread lock on these. That way we know that they're going to be nice and secure once we torque them down. So torque specifications are going to be found in the instruction manual, so you're going to want to refer to that. And if you need a torque wrench, you can find those available here at eTrailer. So we'll just get these snug down first. Now keep in mind, these rear bolts are going to be slightly different torque settings than these lower ones. So check the chart in your instruction manual to get those specifications. Just match it up with the hardware and adjust accordingly on your torque wrench. Now to make sure that this is at our right measurement, I've pretty much found out that as long as I pull this straight up, this will align it pretty perfectly. I'm going to snug this down to hold this in place before coming back with my torque wrench. Now you may need a wrench to go on the nut side, and then we'll get this torque down. Now it might get a little bit tight here with the torque wrench. I'm able to kind of get it on this inside here, which ideally you're going to want to use a torque wrench on the nut side if you can. But if you're struggling getting this in there, you may need to use a crow's foot attachment. But just go ahead and make sure that you get them torqued down and nice and snug. Now make sure that your horn is not making contact with this, and if you need to, it's just on a small little metal bracket. You can kind of bend this to where it's not making contact with the brace. So now we're going to go ahead and remove this foam piece on our bumper beam, and we're going to need to trim a little bit because we're going to be mounting a bracket in this area. So on our passenger side, this just kind of slips in there, and then it's got a tab here on the driver's side that will just push. So make sure you're going from that passenger to driver's side, and I'm going to go ahead and mark this out and get to trimming. So we're going to be trimming out this center section. You're going to want it 5.5 inches wide here, and it's 1/2 inch deep. So to cut through this, kind of, you might have to get crafty here. I think a utility knife, if you were to cut through this, you should be able to make those scores. It might get a little tricky in the middle, but what I'm using is an oscillating tool, and this makes it really easy to just kind of cut through here, and we'll be able to kind of go from the top and bottom to get this chunk out. So we'll go ahead and get this trimmed. Now I've gone through and I've cut down as far as I can with my blade, and I'm just kind of prying up on each side, and you can see that's kind of made it nice and clean here. I'm going to go back and just kind of trim this up, make sure that we have that 1/2 inch clearance. But this is pretty durable stuff. You don't really have to worry too much about cracking this or anything. So if you need to, like I said, like a utility knife, if you work this along, you might need a longer blade to kind of get to this portion, but you can kind of pry and slice as you go, and then you can kind of always go back and sand this. So I'll get this trimmed up real quick. So now we're going to grab this center support brace, and this is going to bolt up to our impact bar. So what I'm going to do is hold this to where it's flush with this little bracket down here. I'm going to mark some parallel lines here. And then what that's going to allow me to do is actually align these holes and just keep it within those lines. Just make sure it's nice and straight. And then from there we can actually make our holes, or at least the markings for our holes where we're going to drill out. So we're going to go through and use a 1/2 inch drill bit to get that big enough for our hardware to pass through. I'm going to start here just by making a pilot hole, make it a little bit easier to start the bit. Now we're going to have to drill all the way through, but obviously your radiator's right here. So if you need to, just to kind of help you have like a nice visual indicator, what you can do is just kind of put a piece of tape on part of the drill bit, and that way you know that you can only go that far before making contact. Another tip too, just putting a little block of wood behind there just to kind of create a stop. That way it'll hit the wood before hitting the radiator. You'll know pretty quickly if you hit this. So whichever method you want to use, just to make sure you don't puncture a radiator, please do that. Now you're going to want to make sure that this bolt is able to be passed through, so if you need to slightly enlarge the hole to get this to pass all the way through, then go ahead and do that. So now we're going to be able to get this bolted up. So this actually goes behind the bumper beam. And we'll get these holes aligned first. And for our bottom hardware, it's going to be just our short bolts here. And then on the back side, we're going to have our split washer and a nut. So I'll go ahead and kind of get those just hand tightened on at least. And I'm also going to be putting some thread lock on here. Once I kind of get them in place, I'm just going to dab it on there before tightening these down. And up top, you're going to want to make sure that you put a flat washer on this longer bolt. And then we're going to pass this through. And then on the back side, we'll have a split washer. And then a nut there. Again, we're going to put thread lock on those as well. So now we'll come back and we're going to tighten these down using the instruction manuals as our torque settings. Now you are going to probably have to get a wrench on the back side there. That way it's not spinning around. And then just go through and finish tightening and torquing the rest of the hardware. Now we're going to need to block off where our air ducts went, and we have this block off plate, and the hardware that they supply is going to be this bolt, a flat washer, and then a nylon lock nut. Now in the diagram they show this facing in with the stud kind of in the wheel well. I don't really care for that. I don't want the tire to ever make contact with this, so I'm going to pass this through the back side where our existing holes were. And then we can go ahead, get our plate in place. Now it is offset, so just make sure that it's facing the proper way to be able to really cover that entire hole. And then we're just going to follow that up with our nylon lock nut here. And then I'll just get this all tightened down, and then we'll just repeat the same process on the other side. Now that ambient air temperature sensor that we pulled out of that air duct needs to be mounted up, and we're going to just use our aluminum cross member here. So just a zip tie around the fins is going to put it right here. It'll keep it nice and protected with this corrugation here. So we'll just wrap a zip tie around the fins, and then we'll just get this zipped up in place. So we'll go ahead and get our foam impact cover here that goes on the bumper beam, and just make sure you lock this side in first on the driver, and then this just kind of pops into place here on this side. And that's really just going to be the final step of the installation. But generally, if you're doing your flat toe components, you're going to want to hook everything up and run wires through here, and it's really hard to do with the fascia in place. So I highly recommend, if you're doing the rest of your flat toe, is leaving that fascia off, getting everything run, and then putting the fascia back on. Now just remember, when you put that fascia back on, you're going to want to make sure to get your washer fluid bottle in place and your fog lamps plugged in. And luckily with this installation, there's no trimming required to get this back in. A lot of times you'll have to cut out for this, but this goes where those air ducts were, so that makes it nice and easy putting it back in. So now that I have my diode wiring ran, that's the only component that we're going to be putting on today, as we're not using a braking system on this vehicle. But if you do have all your components ran and where you want, you're ready to put your fascia back on. So a few steps that you're going to want to do before doing that is you can go ahead and get that washer bottle back in place, kind of snapped in with that hardware. And from there, we're just going to get our fascia, put it on, and we may or may not need to trim for our wiring. We're going to figure that out. But it's going to go on just kind of like in the reverse of how we took it off. So you might want to grab that extra set of hands, and also make sure that you're plugging in your connections, not only for the side markers on the fender wells, but also for your fog lamps. Now we have our fascia put back on, and if you've forgotten to plug in everything, you are lucky. The wheel well liner actually has a nice access panel, so you can get that all plugged in. So just make sure everything is put where it needs to be. Now, as far as trimming goes, there's going to be just a little bit. You could probably do a workaround and put some spacers to extend this out, but honestly, for a nice clean look, we're going to get this put in here as far as our diode wiring. So we are going to need to trim just a little bit here in order for our plug to go in. But other than that, that's really going to do it for the installation of our base plate. So all that's left to do is get the rest of the flat toe components complete, hook up to your RV, and then you're ready to hit the road. And that was a look and installation of the Roadmaster base plate on a 2018 Mini Cooper.